Hi everyone, my name is Patrick Hegberg. So a little bit about me. I've been in the recruitment technology space for the past 20 years, having previously been a headhunter for my sins. And my first role in the recruitment tech space was selling into the recruitment software agency marketplace, where I sold to the likes of Michael Page and Rob Walters and PSDs and those guys. And in fact, Olio is my fourth ATS, having previously been at Verve, Taleo and Lumes. Hopefully my knowledge and insight will offer some real value to you today, and I hope you're able to take away a few of the things from the session and perhaps implement those into your day-to-day. So let's get into it. So I've broken today's presentation down into 3 topics that each in their own right you can take away and ponder. And before I do that, I'll start by defining what is recruitment enablement. It's a definition we've taken to help you change your way of thinking about recruiting and how you measure what you do, to include that measuring of the quality of hire. We'll then look at where are you fishing? Is it passive or active candidates? And we can perhaps review how and what you spend your advertising budget on. And then what does your process look like? Is it fit for purpose? Do you have real understanding on how your process impacts on the candidate's journey, and when to automate, when to be personable, and perhaps recruitment enablement can help to flex the approach there. And then finally, we'll look at how you're measuring quality of hire. Is there a standard? Have you got a process for doing that? As I said, if there's any questions, stick them in the chat, and then at the end of the session, when I hand back to Natasha, we can then take a look at answering those for you. So within the short session this morning, I'll be using a term that may be new to some. We call it recruitment enablement. And most enterprise organisations leverage sales enablement practices to be more effective at reaching customers and hitting their sales goals. It's certainly something I use within my team. And according to research conducted by CSO Insights, having an effective sales enablement function leads to a 2-digit improvement for both quota attainment and win rates for forecasted deals, compared to those organisations without it. So sales enablement is most successful when data and insights fuel that. And we believe that same principle can be applied to the talent acquisition industry. Organisations that leverage recruiting enablement practices see improvements such as overall efficiency and also quality. And recruiting enablement takes the guesswork out of the talent acquisition and allows companies to use data and insights to drive that. So into the main focus for today's session. As you can see from a recent survey by Aptitude Research, that finding and attracting quality hires is top of the list. I would say, has it ever not been at least the top 3? You're either overwhelmed with volume, and therefore you can't cope and can't get to the quality, or you're looking for a needle in a haystack. And I know we all seek to hire the best possible talent, so the key for me is what are the challenges or obstacles, and what can we do to overcome them? I'd be interested to understand further how quality of hire is measured. Are you getting consistent feedback from your hiring managers? And if not, what steps are you taking to drive consistency? Do you get to know how new employees are performing and what the correlation is between the data used to hire them and their performance? I think the reality is there is no standard around measuring it. Talent decisions are based on gut rather than on the data and the insights. So if we look at the top of the funnel, as everything is derived from this, let's look at sourcing. Where are you fishing? Is your quality determined by where you start? Are you using the same resources, the same messages? And when you look at advertising, I'm often drawn to this message. So the problem with traditional job boards is you only find out how successful you've been after you've committed to the spend. You get perhaps too many applicants and you have to manually turn them off, or you may not get enough candidates, but you still spend the same amounts. If we then look at LinkedIn Recruiter, it's the obvious resource, but perhaps mix up where you go fishing. In an earlier presentation we did a couple of weeks back, one of the questions was around the fact that people aren't responding to LinkedIn requests or emails, and what should they do? In particular, post-COVID, with more and more people being made redundant, perhaps flex towards looking at people that are actually looking, not just the passive LinkedIn population, but also use different sources perhaps. We found that clients that use job board aggregators, and I don't just mean Indeed, there are about 20 others out there that you could possibly make use of, not only led to different successful results, but also managed to lower the cost. The trick is making sure that you have control from within the ATS to manage the various sources. As recruiters or the person with the responsibility for the spend, you can't manage relationships with more than one or two aggregators. So use automation. Using the recruitment enablement concept to do the administering of the spend is key. In that way, you can monitor in near real time and flex as you need to. So you have perhaps applicants from a different source or perhaps from your traditional ones. Let's now look at my second point, which is around process. Okay, the process and journey you take candidates on differs depending on the type of role, the industry as examples. And in this example of a student recruitment process, we're asking, is your process fit for what you're looking for? Have you lost high quality candidates because you don't meet their expectations? Is it either too long or perhaps too short? I remember managing a senior compensation and benefits guy for a role at one of the top 4 consultancies when I was headhunting. And I'd set the expectation with both the candidate and the client that this meeting was going to be an exploratory one, the do we even like each other type meeting. The actual result was the HR director offered the guy at the end of the meeting. And the poor candidate didn't know what to say or how to react. He didn't want to offend the HRD. And the long and the short of it is, yes, they did go on to hire the guy, but not surprisingly, I think he only lasted about a year. So they continued to mismanage his expectations. So ultimately, a bad start led to a bad finish all round. One of the senior HR leaders says that after each big recession, which we kind of all accepted we're kind of heading towards, when we have more candidates than jobs, organisations tend to treat candidates poorly. And we just need to keep a focus and perhaps ensure that that doesn't happen. Because even if you're not hiring it right now, being vocal about how you're helping your community and caring for your employees can make it easier to nurture and attract candidates when the time is right. So to that point, have you got the right levels of engagement from the right people to make those high quality candidates feel like they're important or even coveted? Are you managing their expectations? It's the people interactions that matter even more so now that we live in these remote working times. And you need recruiting enabled solutions to reduce the administration elements to automate these actions, allowing for the more human interactions. And what you'll see in this journey, and I can share these afterwards in the inverted brackets, is what is the employer trying to engender at each stage of the process? What are the calls to action? What do we want them to be thinking about? And kind of how can we help them so we get to see the best of them? So to summarise point 2, make sure you automate the right processes to give you the time to deliver the personal and better still, the human interactions for those top quality candidates. And then finally, my third point was around how are you measuring quality? So naturally, with a recruitment enabled focus, we should look at the data. What's it telling us? When we look at measuring quality, we of course need to look at the data points to make decisions with and who's reviewing them. Is there a standard around measuring it? And if not, how do you create one? It's interesting to see from the research that assessment data, i.e. the tests, is relatively low in terms of analysis. And we've certainly found that with clients, that when we looked at their data, they're not using them to drive decision making. However, the CV, in my opinion, has far too much sway. Are we checking it's factually true? Has the candidate perhaps spruced it up professionally, or have they embellished some of the facts? So we would suggest to get some consistency around the data you capture, get some consistency around the tools that you use, and of course ensure that the hiring managers are aligned. Recruiting and enablement systems allow for this to happen by capturing the data and allowing for scrutiny. And the good news is that 72% of enterprise companies are saying that using data to automate the recruiting decisions is a priority. And this matters because the research suggests that companies that use data to automate decision making are twice as likely to improve the quality of hire. So we know that using data and automation to increase quality makes sense. How do we get there? You need a framework for analysis. We know that making data available in dashboards, for example, will not drive meaningful adoption. You need to embed it into your operational process to make it easier to understand and drive adoption by recruiters and hiring managers. And here at Olio, we have the following framework. In part one, we bring together all the relevant ATS and performance data. In part two, we leverage proven AI technology to automatically score data in a bias-free way, and I'll expand on this in a moment. And then in part three, we then look at embedding the candidate recommendations into the recruitment process. In fact, we have clients that automatically progress candidates to interview based on these recommendations. So just to come back to part two, how do you evaluate the selection decisions? You use something like this. This is a dashboard visualization, a dashboard visualization, and what we're looking at here is what are the data points that appear to be the most and least predictive of being invited for interview. And in this case, we can see that the city had a big bearing in this example, but that the test results almost didn't feature. So in other words, getting the data front and center may validate or question how you're doing things and then provide the opportunity to tweak it. So hopefully this has been useful. Perhaps look at your sources. Are there alternatives that might open you up to a different pool of applicants? Is your process fit for the role? Are you keeping quality candidates engaged by ensuring it's fit for purpose, making sure it's not too long or too short? And are you able to review and measure how you're determining what quality looks like and adjust it accordingly?